Doug, tell us a little bit more then about Christiane Taubira, who was a real voice of dissent in Hollande's cabinet.
Yeah, and a voice of dissent and someone whose voice, a compassionate voice, if I may say, who really did fight quite passionately to carry out her function, which is technically, justice minister. But in France, the technical title is Garde des Sceaux, which translates loosely as the keeper of the seal. Her function was literally to put the seal, the imprimatur of the French Republic, on the nation's most important laws, its constitutional amendments. And she made her name, really, this is going well back before the terror attacks, in the same-sex marriage law. She fought passionately for that law, made several speeches in the run-up to the approval of that law. France became the 14th country in 2013 to make same-sex marriage legal in the country. Against great resistance, she fought for that law. There was France being a largely Roman Catholic country, there was a lot of people who came out onto the streets to make it known that they wanted nothing to do with Taubira's same-sex marriage law. Later on, she also became a prominent advocate, defender, legal defender for the rights of prisoners. She saw jail in a sense of something that should be more about rehabilitation, more about teaching and rehabilitating prisoners and those convicted back into society rather than as a vehicle for punishment for the sake of punishment. Once again, she came up against great resistance, even within the cabinet itself in which she was serving. She was always a lightning rod for a lot of vitriol, often very, very violent attacks, verbal attacks from the far right. Marine Le Pen, perhaps not surprisingly, was the first to come out and say this is very good news for France, her resignation. But also from the more mainstream right, which you can argue is less mainstream these days as France goes more and more to the right on the security matters, the tone in political life, on the political landscape, has become harsher, a little more brutal, if you will. And in that context, Christine Taubira, you could say, she didn't really go anywhere. She didn't move. It was the political landscape that essentially shifted around her, moved a bit to the right, so that in the end, while she was very much respected within the cabinet of François Hollande, within his government, remember, she was there under two prime ministers. She's been there for 4 years. She became a voice whose message was no longer tenable in this very tough political atmosphere, a climate which has been going that sort of rightward drift, especially on the economy and security in a France which is right now conflicted on issues of national identity and its future direction.
That's the thing, you mentioned security issues, and the snapping point really was the government security response to the Paris terror attacks.
Absolutely. I spoke about her advocacy on behalf of same-sex couples, her advocacy on behalf of prisoners. It was really this issue that you could say was the snapping point, because this provision, which is going to be voted on in early February by French lawmakers, essentially, and we've been talking and reporting about it, would insert into the French Constitution, not just any old law, the actual founding document of France here, a measure that would strip French-born citizens convicted of terrorist offenses of their French citizenship. And a lot of people have been saying it's illegal. Now, today we're hearing that they're going to actually take out the reference to the word binational, dual national from that legislation. But it doesn't indicate that they're dropping it. It probably means they're going to come up with different wording while keeping the same measure in place. Christiane Taubira was very, very much fervently, steadfastly against this measure, inscribing it in the Constitution. Remember, I said she's the keeper of the seals, the one who has to put that seal of approval on any such amendment. She wouldn't have anything to do with it. She says it's ineffective. She saw it as also pandering to the basest fears of society, and she perhaps saw, although she never really explicitly said, that there was perhaps an element of racism inherent or implied in this type of measure. And as we know in her last tweet, one of her last tweets after it became known that she was leaving, she says that sometimes the best way of resisting isn't to stay but to leave. So she really voted with her feet. There's very much a sense that this was a reciprocal departure, that she no longer could really stick around in a government that had just basically abandoned her in many ways and her line and her convictions.